Thanks, Scott, for a very generous and lovely introduction. Thanks for, to you guys for hosting me. As Scott mentioned, I've known him for some years, and we've always talked about doing something. This book has been kind of 20 years in the making. It's my book, my seventh book, Masaleydaar. I do not have a traditional culinary training, except for learning in your own kitchen, for 40 plus some years. I have a master's in botany, and I got a second master's in landscape architecture, actually from Urbana-Champaign, so from U of I, Go Illini. And I have always been a foodie. We've had people who have been in the food business in our family for for many years on and off and whatnot. My grandfather was a chef at one point in his life, and food has always been part of our family, not just because we're eating it every day or someone is making it every day, but we actually talk about it outside of being at the dinner table. This book, Masaleydaar, was birthed. The idea came to me when one of my colleagues, when I was a landscape architect, she mentioned when I said, "Oh, I'm from India," and she's like, "Oh, I love curry," and I said, "Okay, what kind?" And it was kind of a funny, I wanted to engage her in a conversation, but I realized that she didn't really know past the word. And she was kind of grasping at straws, trying to explain her way out of it. And I was like, oh, don't worry about it. You don't have to know everything. But it got me thinking and has kept me thinking about what people know about Indian cuisine and why there are smaller boxes that people put Indian cuisine in. And this is right before 9/11, so this is more than 20 years ago. And that bug kind of just stayed with me. I went on to do to be a landscape architect for some years after, and in 2010 my world shifted a little bit, and I ended up switching from being a landscape architect to going full, you know, nosedive into food and food writing. And I wrote my first cookbook or I should say, I published my first cookbook in 2015. It was called A Dozen Ways to Celebrate. And I had been throwing dinner parties for a couple of years at that point, and folks would always ask me, "Can you tell us about this? And can you tell us about that?" And I was always bringing out dishes that were different from the restaurant. So I never once served a dish that was found in a restaurant. I was like, well, there's a restaurant, they're doing a good job. If you want to eat that, go there. But here's how we eat, and here's how I would make such and such dish. And that excited a lot of people. So I wrote A Dozen Ways to Celebrate, and that started my journey into food writing and um, kind of being in that space where I was sharing the complexities of Indian cuisine with readers. Either it was a book or it was a an article, and that just kept going. And it has been that way for since 2015, about since then. And I've written books on niche topics. My second book was Crack the Code, and it was essentially a tool, or it was like a workbook for people who wanted to learn about how to build a recipe, how to build an Indian recipe. So all the things that we hear chefs talking about, okay, here's how you do the tadka, and here's how you do the blooming of the spices and all that. There is a method to that madness for Indian cuisine. And I try to simplify it into a nine-step process, nine piece process. And it, you know, every time I experimented with that grid, um, the answers were, my dish was great at the end, and it was very well received. After that, I wrote a food fiction called 10,000 Tongues, and that answered some of the questions about where are you from and why do you cook this way, or do you cook North Indian or South Indian? And like I have a lot of personal ties across the country, and so bringing all those into my kitchen, it became confusing for other people. So I wrote a fictionalized account of about seven or eight, actually eight matriarchs in our family as a family history, and brought it down to 2015 and said, okay, well, this is a point in time when this individual is in the States and is learning to adapt to a different life. So that was 10,000 Tongues. Then I wrote a book on Indian breads called Roti. It is one of the, I would say it is the only book out there on how to make Indian flatbreads, which is the roti and the different kinds. And it's really a very simple primer on the topic. It definitely doesn't cover everything, but it covers your basics, like how do you make roti, how do you make fulka, how do you make naan, how do you make parathas and dosas, and all of those, that genre of, or that space of our, on our plate. The food aspect of it was, dealing with how do we talk about different kinds of breads from different parts of the country and still give people options, so they're not assuming that we're only eating rice, with your meals. The next book after that was a book on Ayurvedic teas, because I got tired of the chai tea latte business. And I'll talk a little more about it later during the conversation, but it was a book about how what the Indian beverage traditions are like. What are they about? How can we explore them without assuming tea is the only thing that happens with Indian beverages? And that was another very well received book, because it, for what it's worth, it was published in the middle of the pandemic, and people were looking for things to do at home with flour. So roti was really popular, and people were looking for ways to go into mindfulness and self-help and self-care and all that. And so that was Seven Pots of Tea, and so Seven Pots of Tea was very popular during that time. But this bug of talking about spices and blends and what Indian cuisine really is, this is the nuts and bolts of it. It's the spine, it's the backbone of the cuisine. And I had to write it. And I was like, I have done all the other parts of it, of the, the Indian platter. Let me talk about what actually makes Indian food Indian food. And that's what launched me into writing Masaleydaar. So just a little bit about me. Scott, do you think we should go ahead into the presentation?
Thank you for that wonderful appetizer about yourself. So now let's get the entree about your book. Colleen, be prepared. Colleen, who I mentioned, also wrote the foreword to the book. So Colleen, before we begin the red questions, we're going to ask you if you have anything you want to say or ask Nandita live. Okay, now you're prepared.
You're going to put me on the spot now. Colleen has been a very great friend of mine for many years, and I was very privileged to have her write the foreword to this. So she's seen the ins and outs of this book, but I'm a little nervous about what Colleen might ask me, but we'll deal with that when we get there. Let me know.
She's a nice person, not to worry.
Oh no, I know she's.
I know you know.
She's a wonderful person. Yeah. It's like you don't know what questions are coming through. So I wanted to start at the very beginning of sorts, just in terms of what folks think about India or ancient India or India from once upon a time. And in the just the way I've done the research and all that, some of these maps are picked up from Wikipedia, which for all it's worth has some good information. So I wouldn't discount it all the way, but just know that those are some of my sources for talking about it. However, there's a lot of research that went into it, into reading from different sources to figure out what actually happened, because no one source has the complete information. But anyways, the Mauryan Empire was very spread out in India in 250 BCE. And this is a great map. It kind of shows how it's laid out. The portion in the middle here, I don't know if you can see the cursor, but there's a huge amount of desert here. So I wouldn't imagine anyone wanting to go and expand empire there. But this was 250 BCE. And I picked this point in time because things happened before this point in time. And the Mauryan Empire was very crucial in creating a little bit of a shift in what people thought about India. So this was once upon a time from 250 BCE. But then before that, there were so many people who came to India, who invaded India from, especially from the north and northeast. The Aryans, they came from the north and northeast, and they moved actually all the way down south, all the way down towards the tip of India, towards the southern coast. The Persians came from the northwest. They also failed. Alexander the Great came through Punjab. He fails, and this is what happens. He is pushed back because of how strong the Mauryan Empire is. And this pushback that he got, the others who came, they were like, the Aryans, they settled into the country. Persians came, they failed, and they left. But when Alexander the Great had to recede and was pushed back, it triggered something in all the other empires that were around it on the north and northeast. And that spiked interest from all of them in India to say, what in the world is going on? How did Alexander the Great get defeated? And so the interest came from all these other people. One of his generals decided to come in and say, let me try to see if I can gain control on some part of India. He failed. There were the Indo-Greeks who came. They came in and they impacted the Mauryan Empire. There was all kinds of things going on. They influenced art. They influenced some of the culture, all of that. The Huna of China took advantage of the Silk Route that was going from China towards other parts of the world. And they split up just a little bit above Delhi, and they split up, and one faction of them, one branch of the Silk Road, came into India, and they came from there. And in the process of doing that, they were ruthless. They destroyed cities on the way. They did a lot of damage, but they were there. They were there in India, and they were trying to grab whatever they could and leave. The Arabs came, the Turks came, the Mongols came. And all of these people who are coming, they are just constantly bombarding the north and the northeast. That is why the north and the north, the north and the northwest. That is why these two regions have such a great amount of complexity in what's happening there. But all of this also suggested that the Mughals got interested. The Mughals got interested. They were one of the early ruling empires that had enough force to try and spread across India. More Persians came. And then all of this, the Europeans were not sitting quietly. The Portuguese sent out ships to come to India to check out what it was about this country that was attracting so many people. The Portuguese, Dutch, French, the Danes, and then lastly, the British. And then this is the funniest thing, and I'm going to bring in a graphic that's going to put things in perspective. We think about India and the British as, this big overlay. Yes, they were the most recent, but in the grand scheme of the timeline of the country, they are this little tiny red dot, a little teaspoon of influence on all the stuff that was going on in India prior to them coming. So if you look at any sliver of time frame, any point in time, there are so many influences happening all at once in this large landscape that we call India. Of course, this is all happening on the north and the Northwest. On the Northeast, there was a lot of interest coming in from China, from all the Asian countries that are on the Far East. They were all wanting to come into India, but that landscape is very different. It is the Himalayas, very tight, not not as bad as the Himalayas on the north, but it's very tight, lots of rivers. It was very hard, but there was a lot of conflict on the Far East as well. And so I look at this in terms of how we had all this influence coming from the land, but we had this occupation of India happening through the coastline as well. And these were the countries coming in that had access to large ships and fleets, and they wanted to trade with India. They were trying to trade with China and making a stopover in India and then moving forward. Along with that was happening on one side. On the other side, we had the Portuguese come in and they were checking out different parts along the coast. And that's where the foreign influences or the I would say the European influences actually entered India. Now, what was interesting when I was looking at this, and this is when I was doing this research for Seven Pots of Tea, for how trade and tea became part of India. And tea had always been in India. They just had not capitalized on making it into a tea plantation. And I'll talk a little more about that later. But this map was really helpful for me to have and to put together because it literally showed how these European powers entered India, and these were the ones that became the coastal towns. So, and what was funny was that Austria and Sweden, of everything else, they were in here as well. And much later in the 20th century, in the mid 30s, Japan had tried to capture a part of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So you can think about all these different people coming, these different traders, what have you, trying to interact and engage with the locals while they're trying to trade. And all of these guys are bringing pieces of their culture into India. So hold on one second. So by the 1760s, this is kind of a general map of India where you had some of the Muslim states or the states that practiced Islam on the northwestern border. And I don't know if you can see the cursor running over. The Sindh province, the Multan province, and Lahore, which is way on top, close to the Himalayas. That those were all of the provinces, the states that practiced Islam in some form. Along with it, you had some on the southern side with the Nizams, which is really, sorry, there we go. Sorry about that. So we had some of that. And then you had the presidency states of Mysore and Bengal. And these are funny because what I mean by the presidency states are states where the British decided that they wanted to capture land and have some form of governance in these areas, which is an early form of their colonial and the growth of the colonial empire. This kind of marked it. And then along with it, we had some others, the Rajputana in the Rajasthan area, the Rajputs. The Marathas were through Maharashtra. They actually went out all the way to Orissa, and they were also part of the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, going all the way to the top to even past New Delhi. And so they were quite active in that regard. And we move in, further in time, and by 1805, between 1805 and the first little bit of the 20th century, the British had basically taken over pretty much all of the country. Now, on this funny looking map, it's actually, it may seem a little harder to read, but I'll kind of quickly tell you, everything that's yellow is a princely state, and everything that's not yellow or is in that, peachy color is the British. And you can tell from like that's how much they grew in those 100 years. They had pretty much taken over an entire country. They were still trying to find strongholds in all of these princely states, and the system was kind of lopsided, where the princely states were fighting among themselves for control. And so the British would come in and say, in order to break up your fights, we're going to offer you some help in terms of governance, but then you owe us taxes, and you owe us this, that, and the other, but you will remain your princely state. And they started slowly eroding some of the powers that they would have. And this became a problem later on. So in the process of doing that, and I'm jumping now into the food aspect of it, and why are we talking about all this? Because a lot of them were starting to recognize that flavors and spices and different foods from different parts of the country were different. And they were not just doing their own, like, let me just do my own food all the time. They were also sending this information back to their countries of origin. So one of the books I came across was this one by Warren Hastings. Terrible person, but he had created this little booklet of condiments. And what was interesting to see is he, in this little book of condiments, creates four, like, this is it's probably about 20 pages big in terms of a book, so it's a booklet, but it's really interesting to see what he has chosen to cover. So he has talked about kashundi, and this is a very typical traditional condiment and a spice paste from West Bengal, but he has offered three kinds. One is a Bengal kashundi, another one is a Madras kashundi, and the other one is a basic kashundi. If you're able to read the notes on there, the funniest thing was that whoever owned this book at one point scratched out the mustard seeds, and on the basic kashondi, saying it is too bitter. Well, the mustard seeds is what makes it kashondi. So if you take the mustard seeds out, it is a paste of everything else, and it can't be called kashondi. So the point of including this was to show that these guys were actually bringing regional flavors to other parts of the world through their work. But it also created a space where folks started thinking about the exotic India, and oh, it's far away, and let's bring some of those flavors back home, which meant that these curry powders started showing up. And this is a little snippet of a book written or rather published in 1897. And this is just one of the few pages from this book where this author is talking about how to teach their house staff to cook. The house staff who is already cooking this stuff. And so it's kind of funny to think about how they are kind of overriding what the locals already know. But on the other hand, it can be a way for communication. So this book was written in English and Tamil. So you had one page in English, and the entire document was like the entire page was translated in Tamil on the opposite side. So whoever was their house cook, chef, what have you, they could produce and prepare something. So in here is a recipe for a Madras curry paste. And basically the top ingredients are all dry. You make it into a powder, and then you mix it with salad oil and vinegar, and you make it to a paste. And then at the bottom half, you'll see another recipe for a curry powder. And then you see this other book, Mem Sahib's cookbook. Again, third edition, not even first or second, and written in 1903 with three different kinds of curry powder. And this is what I mean by presidency blends. You remember the coastline that India has and all the different ports that were occupied. Those ports became part of the presidencies, and those became strongholds. And so these curry powders were the representatives of those flavors from those regions, or so they thought. So there was the Bombay curry powder, the Ceylon curry powder, the Madras curry powder, and many more. And it didn't stop here. So here's what happened. And this is just a snippet of from a wide variety of books I've read. The confusion continues. In this particular book, Dainty Dishes for Indian Tables includes 2 recipes, Calcutta curry powder and Madras curry powder. Mem Sahib's cookbook of cookery, which we saw on the previous slide, 3 presidency-based curry powder recipes. Mrs. Hulton's book has 4 curry powder recipes, including one from Hyderabad, which is another new presidency. And basically, when I read the recipe, it was all these whole ingredients that these folks were using more regularly in some of their dishes. And they just said, instead of using them as a whole, let's combine them, pound them up and make them into a powder. And then that's a blend of its own. And then here's another one. This is in the post-colonial time frame. Has 4 curry powder recipes. And one of them includes 19 spices and 1 entire pound of just regular plain curry powder that this person has already included in their book. And believe me when I tell you, all these recipes for every single curry powder, even if it says Calcutta curry powder, they are all different. Even if it says Madras curry powder, they're all different. Even if it says Hyderabad curry powder, they're all different. And it can be anywhere from 6 ingredients to like this other one with 20 ingredients. And that adds to the confusion because people who are just reading the idea of curry powder don't quite know what they're doing, because it could be anything. It could be the kitchen sink thrown at it. So in comparison, I was looking at what was available to people from India outside of word of mouth and outside of learning from their peers or their family members. This is one set, and then there's this set, and then there are more than these, and these are just things that I randomly found, and some of them I've read, some of them I know other people have read. But in the grand scheme of things, all the way going back to some of the Vedic literature from, centuries ago to more current, these are all locally produced, locally describing local fare. For instance, this book over here, written in 1831, was commissioned by the ruling prince, His Highness Mehtab Chand. And it is very specific to Calcutta, and it's very specific to what he liked. This other one down here, but in 1894, written by Meherbai Jamshedji Wadia, is a book on Parsi cuisine. Parsi cuisine is not often seen outside of Parsi communities, but to know that there is a book that was written in 1894 means that they were trying to capture this information. It wasn't one book, it was actually 3. Similarly, this book here, Mishtana Pak, again from Bengal, several books from Bengal. And it was a matter of national pride for folks to find a way to produce and save some of the content of how locals ate. And that's why we saw a fair bit happen in the early part of the 20th century, also because they probably had more access to printing presses and monies and all that. But they became ways for a nationalist to build nationalist pride. These are some books that I have come across and read, and some I have, of chefs that we may or may not know. Chef Isidore Coelho, he wrote an entire series. He had probably 7 or 8 editions of this book called The Chef, which talks about Goan cuisine way back in 1957. And it's this, roly-poly chubby guy, like a little caricature drawn on the cover. Beautiful, cute book with just so much detail and so much interest in preserving Goan cuisine. Saiman Taparu by Meenakshi Ammal. 1961, in the post-colonial time. Again, she wrote about what was very, very local to her. She was a housewife, and that is like considered the holy grail of all Tamil cuisine. Ruchira by Ogre, Kamala by Ogre. Again, another holy grail of Maharashtrian cuisine, just written specifically for people from Maharashtra who spoke Marathi, vegetarian. The pleasures of vegetarian cooking. If you guys have access to any friends who have any form of Indian channels, there is a movie kind of thing on her life, on Tala Dalal's life, and she kind of released the housewife from all the the stress of trying to come up with new recipes, because she was actually showing people how to do things. And then of course we have, Madhur Jaffrey, who, her book, when I was comparing everything, Invitation to Indian Cooking is considered a classic Indian book. It was produced in the United States. It was produced after all these other people who had been writing came. And it's a great book, don't get me wrong, it's a great book. But if we appreciate what book this is that she has done, the work that she has done, there are so many others that came before her. And they are all talking about regional cuisine that is very, very special. So it just kind of gave me more wind to the fire. It added more fuel to explore the Indian cuisine more than I had before. So I mean, I think somewhere we'll have this this presentation out for you guys to look at. So I went back and to think about what the word masala means, and it means, it's one word, but it has so many interpretations just in the Indian language. A masala can be a blend of whole seed spices, which is called a sabut masala. In here, in this example, I have a sabut masala that I use to make, a mango pickle or a preserve, a savory mango preserve. Oh, this went away. This is khada garam masala, which is whole spices that are used whole. Or you could have a powdered blend of spices, and all these have the word masala in it. So it's not just someone else who's confused. It can be a very confusing concept of what actually makes a masala. So when you're looking at a restaurant menu and it says Masaleydaar, you're going to have to ask them what masala they have used, because it just doesn't mean flavorful. You have to kind of break it down and see what it actually means. So when I was writing this book, it was really hard to figure out how to combine all of these blends into one, or what kind of organization I would have. And I put together a rough grouping of regions based on some of the similarities in terms of ingredients, climate, some of how the powers had moved through, if you will, through the country. And in doing so, I managed to kind of group it into 5 big chunks of regions. And I will tell you this upfront, it is impossible to say that there is one spice for one blend that is iconic to every state. And there are a total of 36 geographical administrative units, whether it is a state or it is a union territory or what have you. To think about it that way, and this is just if I just looked at it by state and said state or a union territory or whatever, it's impossible to say that there's only 36 that are very representative. So I went in through all of them and looked at the geography, and from when I discussed earlier, I started seeing how the patterns of all these different people coming into India was affecting what they ate today. The dishes that I covered, never mind, I'll get to that when I do, but they're not your overly traditional things. I will have usually picked one traditional dish for a region and then done something that's slightly different, more accessible to us, because I want people to learn and know more about those regional cuisines. So the feast from the Northeast, the first one is, I mean, there are more than these, but I picked up some representative samples to just kind of talk through some of this. There's a soup that I have fallen in love with. This is one of my favorite soups, and it includes everything that would grow naturally locally there, including bamboo shoots, including lemongrass, including whatever meat was available. The region for the Northeast is such a um, it's such a complex region because it has several rivers running through it. It is at the edge of the Himalayan mountain range, which makes the terrain impossible to predict what your weather is going to be like because of the terrain. You end up with people just using whatever they can get their hands on and using the fresh herbs and spices to build flavor, which is an important difference from the rest of the country. So you will find everything from the Northeast has far more fresh ingredients than anywhere else. They do have a lot of fermented dishes. They do have a lot of preserved and fermented meats because of the climate, and they want to make sure that they can eat later on when the weather is bad. But otherwise, very vegetable forward, very foraging forward dishes. So this is one of those. There were some rice noodles to go with it, and it has really a very nourishing, filling dish. A couple of things that come into play here with the influence from China and from the Far East. Those brought in flavors like using bamboo shoots, using lemongrass as part of the cooking, as part of the food. Another one that I stumbled into and fell in love with was this kheer made with black rice. Rice is an important part of this region, and black rice is essentially a dark rice. You can use forbidden rice for it, but your point is to use the rice with the husk still on. And this has become every time I read about this dish, people were talking about it as a comfort food, that it was easy to put together and it was comforting. So when I made it, it was like, yeah, why aren't we talking about this? This should be on every restaurant menu. This should be in everybody's dish, everybody's repertoire, because it's easy and it's very hearty and delicious. It's gluten-free because it's rice, and it's a dessert. So the only difference with this is that you've got to soak the rice beforehand so that it softens. But again, another really versatile, simple dish that comes together with boiling rice that has been soaked for a little bit with dairy. And that's all it takes to make this. The last one on this page is another rice dish, but this is actually not rice. This is bamboo rice. Bamboo rice is the grain of bamboo. Bamboo flowers maybe once or twice in 100 years, and the seeds are saved as famine food. And in regions where bamboo grows, of course, at one point in time on the bamboo's life, the bamboo is going to die. And locals will go out and collect the bamboo grain, the bamboo seed, and store it for when they cannot find something else to eat. This happens across bamboo growing regions, including the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which is far out into the Bay of Bengal and closer to all the other countries and on the other side. But this is the level of simplicity of the cuisine from the Northeast. There are, yes, occasionally you will find things where they use a little bit of garam masala, or they will use maybe a Chinese 5-spice to add a little extra flavor. But that's not traditional. That's not like every day. That's like, oh, well, there's a special day, just like you would throw a little special blend of some spice for a special meal. So this is what everyday people are eating. This is from the Northeast. Then I moved down from there to the pepper country. Pepper country is along the coast of India. And, oh, it went away, sorry. Some of the major influences were things like the Marathas who came from from the west side of India all the way towards the Bay of Bengal. They basically had they had coast to coast, they had their powers there. Also, the French were in Puducherry, which was originally called as Pondicherry. And they brought some of their influences into how these blends came to be. So they looked for things that were more aromatic, and they were going into more of the delicate aromatics compared to some of the more robust aromatics from elsewhere in this region. So the Puducherry garam masala that I was able to kind of find and kind of experiment with and I arrived at, that one has notes of vanilla in there because it has the cinnamon. There's a balance between the cinnamon and the cardamom, and that is, it's a very funny, if you don't know what you're smelling, you won't know what it is, but it's that vanilla and smell that comes because of the cinnamon and the cardamom. There is pepper, there are different kinds of pepper in that blend, and all of that makes for a very unique Puducherry garam masala. That, when combined with dishes that use coconut, which is again very unique to this part of the country, it's a completely different flavor profile. You're not finding this anywhere else in the country because of the combination of spices and the fresh ingredients going into it. Another iconic one was a curry leaf paste. This is a fresh masala, which means that it is made right then and there, right before you're going to eat. Sorry, excuse me, right before you're going to cook. So it's made fresh, a curry leaf masala. It essentially has curry leaves that are sauteed in gingerly oil, which is a kind of a sesame oil. The heat comes from black pepper, from garlic, and from some chilies with some coriander seeds. Everything is pounded together, and then that becomes part of the flavor masala that makes your dish. You cannot find this combination anywhere else in the country. And then there's another part of India along the south west coast, the Lakshadweep Islands, the Lakshadweep Islands, and the Lakshadweep Sea. It is very close to Sri Lanka, and you find influences from across the ocean in this cuisine from the Lakshadweep Islands. Now, when you think about southern India, of course, and these are just representative, I have covered pretty much every region in there with dishes. But what was really unique was that the island cuisine was so delicate because it is hard for the ingredients to travel across the bay, across the Lakshadweep Sea. And so they're just using whatever the fresh catch is, whatever they can grow on the island. And the what they call the string hoppers are basically rice noodles that come in dried form and can survive on the island without any special storage. They can make them if they want to, but if the noodles are available across in India, they're bringing those in. And so the diet consists of things that are so simple. So here on one side, you have, from one side of the coast, you have something that's really complex and very layered, to something that is very simple. In the far on the screen on the far right is a sauce. The sauce itself is coconut milk, coriander seeds, coriander leaves or cilantro leaves, and some curry leaves. That's all in the sauce. That's it. And you would think that it's called, it's right next to all these spices. These guys are living out in the ocean. They may or may not have access to all the spices that we think they should. And that's the cuisine. So again, very varied. Moving forward, moving up the coast, the western and upper western India, this is the part of the country that I grew up in. And again, every region, because of the way the mountains are on the leeward side of the mountains or the windward side of the mountains, the cuisine differs based on what people have access to. So along the coastal side of India, along Maharashtra, things like tetsa. Tetsa is it's a very rustic, it's actually a condiment that you can use to make a dish, to season a dish. What does it have? It has shallots or little, you could use shallots, you could use red onions. It has peppers, and sometimes they use teppan peppers, they sometimes use tipal peppers, or they will use green chilies. They will use some cumin seeds and fresh coconut, pound it all together, get their raw materials together for whatever the ingredient is. In this case, I have used the baby zucchinis. Toss it together, and in an instant, you have a very flavorful, fragrant dish that didn't take very long to come together. But again, it's so representative of the flavors of this region. Another one that I absolutely loved, and I had a ball exploring this, was the Vidarbha Kala Masala. Vidarbha is a region in the heart of India, and literally, if you were to draw a, do a crosshair, it would be in the center, but it falls in Maharashtra. This region is surrounded by tiger reserves. It is in the heart of the country. It is as wild as India can be, period. And there are a lot of cotton farms, cotton fields around in the areas that are agricultural. And again, this region had a lot of influence and a lot of interest from different parts of India. There were Nizams who wanted to come. There were parts of the Sultanate, that the Hyderabad Sultanate, that wanted to come into it. There were the Maharashtra, from the Marathas and the Peshwas wanted to control some parts of it. So there was a lot of local conflict. And from that emerged a cuisine that is very, very robust. It's almost like it mimics the energy of the people who live there. This is a very strong masala, a strong blend. It includes things like black sesame seeds. It has nigella seeds. It has coconut, peanuts. So many things go into it, but that one bite is just, it hits the spot. It's that one bite that you get out of it that is like, I've never had anything like this before. And it's such a well-loved masala and people want to protect it a lot because they're like, you won't like it, so I won't tell you what it is. But you want to explore it, and you realize that it is so rich because it uses things that are growing locally. They're growing sesame every now and then, so they add sesame. The locals love using peanuts, so they're adding peanuts to it. Fresh coconut is not easily available here, so when they get their hands on the dried coconut, they will take every fleck of the dried coconut they can and put it into a masala and make it count and make the masala last. So this was a dish that I came up with. It is kala masala bites. And it was a little like, you can make it as an appetizer, what have you. But it was a lot of fun to just explore that aspect of the cuisine. And then this is another one that our family kind of agrees to disagree on whether it is one way or another. It's called dal dhokli. And dal dhokli is a dish that comes from Gujarat. It's one of my personal favorite dishes from Gujarat. And it is essentially a lentil stew or a dal that is seasoned a certain way. It has nuts, it has raisins, and it's sweeter, but it's also got a very nice level of heat to it. So it balances the sweet and heat. And in it are whole wheat noodles that are added into the dal as it is boiling, and the noodles cook along with it. So when you get a bowl of dal dhokli, that's all you want. You don't want anything else with it because it's a complete meal. It has the gluten thickens the dal from the wheat noodles, etc. And it's really, really nourishing. It's very filling. In a couple of years ago, before I started writing this book, I developed an intolerance to wheat, or rather, I want to say the wheat bran. And I cannot eat whole wheat. So I can't eat the roti, or I can't cook from the roti book that I wrote. It's funny. But I couldn't pass up the opportunity to include dal dhokli as part of this region because it's so loved. And the dal dhokli will usually have vegetables in it. So if the season's right and they have red pumpkin growing, they will throw in red pumpkins. They may throw in sweet potatoes. They may throw in a bunch of different vegetables. But when I found this stuffed ravioli with butternut squash, I tasted it and I knew that I could eat the ravioli. So I decided to combine a ravioli that I could eat that was stuffed with butternut squash into the dal dhokli recipe. And the combination does not make me miss the wheat noodles at all. So I'm offering a little deviant from the traditional form. But again, if you don't have dietary concerns like I do, go find a dal dhokli that's made with the wheat noodles. Go find the dal dhokli that's made with even the besan or the gram flour or the chickpea flour. And they are just variations on the same dish. Right next to it in this, to the Gujarat and Maharashtra, are two very, very big regions, Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. And it was impossible to set them into anything else. So they had to sit together. And the coincidence that it is, my great grandparents were from Rajasthan who moved to Indore, which is in Madhya Pradesh. And it was a beautiful, cute little love story they had. And when I was writing this book, I was like, oh my God, these two were together then. And I wondered if my great grandmother would have cooked from some of these things that I was running into. But geography, like I want to bring up a couple of things about the geography and how it shapes the cuisine. Again, this was a part of the country which was struggling with this routine foreign invasion that I was talking about. Everybody coming in, everybody and their friends coming in from the north and northwest. So they had to make sure that their families could eat, they could harvest whatever they can, and they had things in store. And what happened is over time, with the very, very harsh weather of the Rajasthan desert, they started converting a lot of their produce into dried things, which is what you're seeing here. This is called kachri, or it's a melon. And a kachri can be many things, but this is one particular melon that is harvested. It grows wild, it's harvested, and it's stored. And this is used as a meat tenderizer. And so this became one of those things that people in Rajasthan, people in Madhya Pradesh use very often. It came, I would suppose somebody discovered it by accident. But again, it fastens the cooking process and it makes life a lot easier. But it also reflects on how people were making the most of the time that they were spending in the kitchen cooking. So they're not spending hours and hours working with a stew and just like waiting for things to cook. So this actually becomes part of a Rajasthani garam masala, which I have included in the book as well. And it, again, is one of those things. The flavors are so different. They're so unique. They go with some really rustic, earthy, warm dishes. Like you could make a stew with red pumpkin and add it in, and it's just that little extra difference that is different from ordinary garam masala. And then one of them, some of the regions, they have between Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, they have similarities in what they serve. They call different things. So kachori is a word that you will come across often, if particularly for this region, for Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. And kachori is nothing but a croquet-like stuffed dish. It comes in many different shapes and forms. And how do you explain kachori to somebody and make it easy for them to enjoy? So this is an adaptation of a kachori. It is typically you could have a kachori which has the outer filling made of white flour, or a couple of different kinds of flour. They sometimes make it with wheat flour as well, or they would make it with mashed potatoes, and these are then filled with something else, either a potato or peas or what have you, mash, and then they're deep fried. Well, the process is quite labor intensive, and instead of going that route where I give you, or whoever's cooking, give them a long route to get to the flavors. We cut it down, and I said, let's try making potato boats using, potato halves, scoop them out just like you would do one of our, those Thanksgiving spreads, and you could make this ahead and enjoy the idea of a kachori without the work. So the point was to actually let people enjoy the cuisine in whatever form that was accessible to them. And last but not least, the regions that I was talking about was the top part of India. Is the chapter is called Of Mountains and Valleys. And I was looking at all these different parts of India that had struggled and suffered the wrath of all the foreign invasions that came in, and they still managed to come up with some of the most beautiful dishes. And these are life experiences that have collected for them. So one of the things that I stumbled into is a salt that is made. It's called pisiulun, and a pisiulun could be. There are different ways of describing what pisiulun is, and its names change based on what ingredients are used. And then essentially it is the Himalayan pink salt is crushed with a couple different herbs or spices of fresh herbs and spices, and is sprinkled onto whatever vegetables they might be eating, just to add more flavor and depth to it. So it could be, they could have, crush the pink salt with garlic and cilantro, or they can crush it with the coriander seeds and something else, and just make that salt more flavorful. So whatever they're eating just has that little extra flair to it. And pisiulun is very, very versatile, and I could not pass up not discussing it. But it also adds to a cottage industry in the mountains region. So these are things to kind of like, I was excited to share this because we don't think about cuisines as being part of other people's livelihoods as well. And this was one of those that is. And I explored something else. The broader umbrella of the term is called bhe, which is vegetables that are cooked with chickpea flour or besan. And there can be many different kinds. But again, exploring what bhe means. Bhe is a very popular local flavor. It's a local dish, and people will go nuts about it if they see it on your menu. But these are dishes we don't know about. Again, using local, what is locally grown. Lotus root is, you cannot discuss any part of Northern Indian cuisine without adding lotus root to it. So there's a dish in Masaleydaar which is a recipe for the bhe, that uses a tandoori masala, that you would not think to use tandoori masala in this form. But the dish is fantastic. When you taste it, you will never eat tandoori masala the same way. And then something like this. This is nihari. This is nihari masala. Nihari masala came to India from, it was the gift of the Mughals and the Nizams, and who came through India, and they wanted a stew first thing in the morning when they were trying to break a fast during the Ramzans, and they would have a meal before they would start a fast. Actually, that not break the fast, but start a fast. And so the meal that they have at dawn, or in some cases, it was the first meal they had, and the meat was cooking overnight, and it was cooked with marrow and the bones and everything, and it was very, very luscious. The masala that goes into making nihari is, again, nuanced and complex, but you will not be able to find that flavor in anything else. It's just the balance of the aromatics and the heat that comes from the nihari masala. So these are things that I'm seeing now, like after I've written Masaleydaar, I'm seeing some of these names show up now on menus in restaurants, or people talking about in literature, or, I'll suddenly see an article on Bon Appetit or somewhere with some of these flavors. But these are traditional to them, to the people who live here. And I'm moving to the last one of the second last chapters is on drinks. And this was, I'm told, Colleen told me this was her favorite chapter, about drinks, and not just alcoholic drinks, but spices and flavors are such an important part of Indian cuisine that no matter what religious affiliation you may have, it shows up somewhere. And so we have talked about, like, or at least I have talked about in Seven Pots of Tea, about how tea or chai, I wouldn't just say tea, I would say chai, how chai is a small part of one of India's many beverages. And tea existed in India before the British. The British only came, wiped out the land, cleared the land, found this tribe, the Shingpo tribe, who was living there, said, "Oh, show me what you're doing," and they picked up those tea plants, propagated them, started making tea plantations, and that's how tea became popular, or tea was commercialized in India. I wouldn't even say popular. It was never popular, not until very recently. But the beverage traditions existed. And there is a tea made in the same region of Assam, where the Shingpo tribe lives, from where the British first started having the Camellia sinensis, the tea happening. There was another kind of beverage called a chako, which is a tea made by brewing the black rice. And that is a black rice tea. Believe me, if you have this black rice tea, it will soothe your mind. It will just like calm you down. And it is so fragrant and simple. And you never think about it as that being a tea that you can associate with India. Another thing that I wanted to add is we're very familiar with lassi and chai. And over the winter break, we were in India, and I went to Lucknow. And I've always wanted to go to Lucknow. It's such a food-centered city. It's filled with so many different things to eat and drink and taste and all of that. And there were two things that struck me very prominently in Lucknow, is that they have a very strong love of all of their street eats, lassi being one of them. And they make a rabdi lassi, which is a lassi that has a big, thick layer of a thickened milk. It is the consistency of whipped cream, but it's actually thickened milk that is cooked with spices, etc., and sweetened. And also, parallel to this love of lassi, in Lucknow, there are so many old relics and old buildings from whenever there were mutinies happening locally, that the city has decided to keep them, and actually they are archaeological sites, and so you cannot do anything with it. In India, if there is any country that needs to build, like anywhere, India is not one that was going to actually, say, "Oh, we're going to respect some of this is dilapidated. We need to," they will go and bulldoze it. It was funny to see all these old buildings with cannonball holes in the walls. And they had protected this entire estate as a reminder of the mutinies that had happened in Lucknow and the opposition for the British. And it was kind of funny to see that as, two traditions happening simultaneously. They're so much in love with their Nizam, the traditions that came from the Awadh families of Awadh and the Nizams, and then this hatred for everything that was British. Well, tea was never loved as much with India or the Indians as the British did. And so while the British was trying very hard to erase Ayurveda from India, and that's a whole other story, the Indians started thinking about how they were dealing with this beverage that was offered to them as a way of social mobility. It was like, oh, it's one of those hip drinks that, if you want to be, gain favors with the Goras or with the British, maybe serve them tea. So they started doing that, and in the process of that, they were like, well, we can't get to our herbs and spices the way, because the British were trying to kill Ayurveda. How do we incorporate it into what we are eating and drinking? And a lot of the Ayurvedic herbs were converted into brews, and they were consumed as part of those brews. So some ingenious person decided to come up with the idea of combining the Ayurvedic brew with this tea, and made the combination of masala chai that we know of. And the masala chai came from this tradition of making a drink that was not palatable, enjoyable. And so when I was exploring the drink section, this is kind of my creation, on my take on the chai and the rabdi and the lassi combination, and I put them all together in one. It's a fantastic drink. I've taken it many, many, many places, and everyone has fallen in love with it. So I definitely recommend you try this one out. But as much as I, being the daughter of a freedom fighter, dislike the British and what they did, because they really did a number on they used food as a way to control people. And so I didn't think it was fair to count on their culinary contributions to India, because they did use it as a way to punish those who didn't follow their orders. But they did bring gin to India. And it was a way for them to combat malaria, because, for whatever reason, they thought gin was going to help them with malaria. But the tradition of gin and tonic came to India with the British. And so I thought it was, fair to include a gin and tonic on that they would have contributed. And the recipe I have here is a Bahari Paloma, which is a paloma with the pisiulun. And if you taste this one, you're never going back to a paloma again. Just the normal way, just because the combination is very, very unique, and it's very enjoyable. And it's got a little savory kick to it. Again, through the entire book, I was looking to highlight different local ingredients. Fiddlehead ferns are so popular in the mountain regions that we don't really think about, and how do we bring more people to use them? So this section has probably is a small section on just how spices and spice blends can become incorporated into your beverage traditions. And then just as an overarching theme I had, when I started writing the book, I was starting to learn pottery, and I wanted to make cups and bowls and whatnot for the food photography. And I kept running into this situation where all the ceramics that I was learning were all Eurocentric, and they were not responding to what I wanted to do for this book. I also stumbled into a lot of research about how leaf plates were part of the food culture. Not that I didn't know about it, but again, the reminder helped. And so I took it upon myself to do things like this, where I began to offer a visual reminder to people that these cuisines are ingrained and anchored in certain regions. This set that I have is a wood-fired common. It was glazed and then wood-fired, and the wood firing actually adds a lot of dynamic elements to the ceramic pieces. But I wanted to plate the dishes like this, which is momos. You would not think momos happen in India, but because of the Chinese influence, momos had come into India. They have come into Tibet and Bhutan. From there, they've made their way into India. This is a tree tomato. It's it tastes exactly like a Roma tomato, but it's called a tree tomato, and it's also used in in Hispanic cuisines, so in Latin cuisines. So, I'm seeing the tree tomato is popular in Assam, is popular in Meghalaya, is popular in that Northeast. So I'm seeing this parallel happen, and just doing that to kind of offer a reminder. This one is Kashondi roasted, or Kashondi topped salmon, Kashondi grilled salmon on posto potatoes, or potatoes with poppy seeds. Again, very, very unique to West Bengal. But again, I was looking at how do I plate it, and the leaves of the Bohemia plant is a vine. Is actually, this particular one is a vine. The leaves are so large, people use them as plates. So when we think about Indian cuisine just being on banana plates, banana leaves, that's not true. It happens in other ways, and I wanted to offer that reminder over and over again through different parts. And lastly, like, pan and the banana leaf, I wanted to bring that in and just be able to talk about specifics, that these components of the cuisine just are not just there. You can't just like haphazardly throw things together. These are important to the localities where they are being used. They're important forms of commerce. They're important forms of identity for the people from there. And they are part of that narrative. So we need to change how we think about Indian cuisine being just one thing or another, because it's not. It's so diverse and it's so complex. And I think this is the last slide on that. Yeah, so there was that. So, oh man, I rambled on.
Thank you so much. I have one critique of your talk,
Oh,
and I hope you take it in the spirit that I intend to give it. But
yeah.
I found something excruciating about it. I haven't had dinner, and I am so hungry now. I'm suffering from excruciating hunger pains.
I'm
So,
sorry.
but briefly, Colleen, um, let's see, Colleen, let's see. Would you have anything to add, or can you unmute? Can you say anything briefly about, and you wrote the foreword to the book, and you're responsible for Nandita's being here tonight.
Yes, she is.
And can we
Yeah,
see
I
you?
actually, yeah, I just have a question, and this is
Can we see
really,
you too?
can you hear me?
Yeah, but can you turn on your, unless you forgot to put on your makeup, can we see what you
Oh,
look like too?
I don't know, it's not working. I turned it on.
We see you.
Oh, okay. I can't see myself though. Okay. Yeah, yeah, just one thing. The reason that they use gin for malaria, it wasn't the gin, it was the tonic, which is made from quinine water.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, the Native Americans use. So, and some people even say that the gimlet was invented in India, but I don't know about that. But certainly, it's one of the great things the British gave to the world was the gin and tonic. So,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, I'm going to ask you something because this really is really more involved with the work that I'm starting to do now. Because I want to write a history of Indian food in the U.S. What do
Uh,
you think about having written about Indian food for so long and really being familiar with it? Do you think that it's becoming more popular among Americans? Because Indian food always ranks behind Chinese, Thai, and Mexican, in terms of popularity. And I don't know if it's becoming more popular, and really what can be done to really make it more popular so that people don't go to restaurants and order tandoori chicken and saag paneer. I mean, I think saag paneer should be banned because then people would eat other things, samosa. I mean, it's just seems after 50 years, it's still pretty much the same thing. What do
No,
you think about that?
I agree with you 100%. And if we've talked about this at length before, but for the sake of our group, I'll share again that I think that it's a matter of educating the consumer.
But
Uh,
who does that? That's the question.
that there are 3 or 4 ways. One of them is to continue writing, and that's like, what I like to do is shift from, there's a phrase in my book actually which says, like, if you're looking for a recipe for just straight up curry, return the book for a refund, because you're not going to find it. But also just getting people to actually push them to feel more comfortable with exploring cuisines. So whether it is a talk like this, or it is a book, or it is just getting your local restaurateur to offer something that is not traditionally on his or her menu, that would be helpful. What I've run into and found from restaurateurs is they have told me that people are tuned out,
Mm-hmm.
and they are not ordering things that they would the chef would want to make,
Mm-hmm. That's
and
right.
instead are going straight for, like, butter chicken and saag paneer and tandoori chicken and naan, and that's all they know. So
Yes.
there is an aspect of education that needs to happen. In what form it's going to happen, I don't know. I know that there's a lot of media out there that takes snippets of information, and every now and then I'll see someone do a deep dive into one dish. The difficulty is that there is so much of it now that we're starting to tune out, and people are not paying attention, because they're like, oh my god, this is the mill of what this publication is putting out. One week it's, today it's this dish, tomorrow it's that dish, tomorrow it's that dish, and the tone is the same. So I'm seeing a lot of that, which is disheartening. But I think it's a matter of feeling, taking people on tours. If people want to go to a grocery store, I encourage my friends to come with me, like if I'm going to the grocery store. And that's when the fear of what they don't know goes away. And that's when the fear of seeing a dish they don't know is less, and they're more likely to try it. And so it's kind of rooting it out from the seed of the fear, of not knowing.
That's
Um,
true because I've done 2 tours recently for the Rogers Park Historical Society. So I do a Devon Avenue tour, and we go into we even sample, and then we did dinner in a very nice Hyderabadi restaurant, not on Devon, off Devon. I ordered the whole menu, and it featured halim. Now nobody had ever heard of halim.
yeah,
They just loved it. Halim is kind of a porridge made of beaten up grain and things.
yeah,
And people went back, people liked it. But there's only so many tours that one can do.
right,
And
right, right.
so it's really, some governments, for example, the Thai government and the Korean government actually have programs to support their cuisines overseas. And because culinary tour, people now go to Korea and go to Thailand to eat because culinary tourism is a big thing. So, and I'm going to be giving a talk to the run by the Ministry of Tourism later on this topic. So that's why I'm kind of interested in it. What can, and I don't even know, even if they did that, even if they supported restaurants, if people aren't going to order it, what difference would it make? It's really a difficult problem. I think you're right. Books like yours, people like the culinary historians, are finding more about it. So yeah, so I think what you're doing really helps a lot too.
Thank you. Thank you. No, I think it's a matter of all of us, like, banding together to make that awareness happen. I know that in just the short time that I have been doing this, the awareness has improved. Also because I don't come at it just from an author's perspective. I'm covering people, I'm writing about them, I'm writing articles, and I'm going out and seeking people who are and celebrating people who are actually doing some of this in their restaurants. And that helps them. And all those restaurateurs have come back and told me how much me understanding that, right, their cuisine has helped them.
Yes.
And when I'm writing it, so when I mean, sometimes when I see someone write a piece, and they don't understand the cuisine well enough, they miss so many nuances. It's like mind-boggling. Oh my god, you missed something that was critical, that the chef went out of their way to do for you, and you missed it. So it's just things like that, and it's a matter of just continuously trying. So you tinker your way through it.
Thank you.
Of course.
And Colleen, thank you. That was a wonderful question. Nandita, where are you in Atlanta right now?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So Nandita, would it be, so from Jeffrey, would it be difficult to make most of those masalas if one lives near or doesn't live near an Indian grocery?
No, it wouldn't be hard. My books have gone all over the world, and I have picked masalas that are masalas that have fairly straightforward ingredients. There are one or two where, yes, if you don't have that ingredient, you just have to know that you're missing one thing. But it's, you're still going to get very close to the flavor. For instance, I know kachri is not an easy ingredient to find. Um, you have to go to a community that has a very large Indian market, and they will often have kachri as a whole or will have it as a powder. But that doesn't mean that you eliminate the idea of working with or trying out a masala altogether. One of the things that I talk about in the first half of the book is the fact that every family in India makes a masala differently, even if it is the same name, and everybody puts their own spin on it. So think of the ways that I offer 3 different ways of how masalas are written, and how you can experiment with them. One of them is a general idea of flavors. For instance, this particular masala has these 3 high notes and these 3 low notes, adjust based on what you prefer. And that gives you the flexibility of working with that. Then there's a second set of masalas. The recipe, the format is X parts of this to Y parts of that to Z, to Z parts of something else. And that way you can balance out, I don't want you to make 2 pounds of something when you need 1 teaspoon. So again, the flexibility is there. And then I'm trying to be practical because I know, you guys are not going to like sit down with like my study in my kitchen has pounds and pounds and pounds of raw material that I would not recommend for you. And then there's a traditional way of 1 teaspoon of this, 2 teaspoons of that, whatever. So all of those ingredients, again, if someone is just think of it that if you have a health condition that you can't eat 1 ingredient or 2 ingredients, skip those. That's fine. So that you can at least get to the flavors that you're looking for. Now, if the recipe calls for 10 ingredients and you're missing 9 of them, that's just adding salt. So I think most of it is doable. For the beast that it is, Amazon does have a lot of things. And again, another way to kind of get the cuisine also visibility for it is if you have smaller markets in your neighborhood, ethnic markets, ask them if they have it or if they are planning to carry it, or if when they put in a next order, they can order some for you. That way you are showing interest in a particular ingredient. So I hope that answers you, Jeffrey.
How was food used to punish people?
Yes, great question. There are accounts written by seafaring, people who went out as soldiers with the British, the East India Company, in all the different wars that they wanted to, get the support of humans to fight their wars for them. And there are so many accounts where they would talk about how the brown laborer, the Indian laborer, or the Indian seaman, or the person who was, one of their sepoys, in order to keep them online, they would feed them less, only give them rice and dal, not give them proteins in any other form. And because they were on the ocean and there was very little in terms of fresh vegetables, they would hire all these people, but not tell them about what they could and could not eat. And so they would have meat for themselves, for all the white people, for the British, but all of the Hindus or all of the people from India, their rations were really, really strange. They didn't get to eat well. Another part, I don't know if you guys have heard about the Bengal famine. That's worth reading. It will break your heart because Churchill decided to send a lot of the wheat that was meant for locals and that was growing in Bengal during the Second World War. He decided to ship it all out to feed the troops, and it caused a famine in India. And he was never asked to be accountable for it. Why? Because this is our country, we rule it, it's fine, So there were many, many, many instances like that where food was used as a way to keep control. Communities were taxed, unfairly taxed. There were forest tax that were levied for foraging in the forest, for the locals and the tribals to forage in the forest. They were taxed. For grazing in the forests, they were taxed. And all of these things, if their cattle was not able to graze, then there was no milk. So what is this person going to do? Of course, you guys have to read about the salt tax. My grandfather was part of the salt tax revolts, and so he had gone to jail a couple of times for it. But the sea salt that people needed every day for their food was taxed. And that was like that, you don't even have to do anything with it. These are our natural resources. So there was a lot of that happened. People working on any of the plantations, those guys were bonded labor. They didn't have access to healthcare. They didn't have access to education. They didn't have access to food. They had ridiculous work hours, and they were bonded labor, which meant every generation that lived and grew up in it was bonded to working the plantations. So it's a very tedious and a very traumatizing account of how the British used food as a way to control, and where all their people, where all the locals were working, how they were deprived of food in spite of being part of the workforce. So
wow.
Yeah.
So
thank you, Jeffrey.
There's a few comments, and I'm sure you can read and you can have them available to look at later. But Atara said, she truly enjoyed this presentation. I do concur the Indian restaurant dishes and experience must evolve, and to include a diversity of less known dishes from all of India. And I'd like to make an aside, because Colleen wrote about 10 years ago, a book on how to order in an Indian restaurant. And she and I have talked, and I know it's probably my fault at this point, I think the ball's in my court, about having a program in a restaurant and ordering these foods that are not the usual repertoire. Did you want to say something, Colleen? Hold on. You can unmute. Unmute, Colleen.
I have to unmute. Yeah, that's a good idea. I know we've talked. Let's do it. I've got a couple of ideas.
Excellent. Now my feet are to the fire. We'll really happen now. Jeffrey said, I had an interest in learning more about Indian cooking and quickly became overwhelmed by the number of different ingredients, different names used, and how the name of the same ingredient changed depending on which manufacturer was the supplier from one month to the next.
I'm so sorry, Jeffrey. That shouldn't happen. I have one book for you. Go pick up the Crack the Code. And I'm telling you, when I learned how to cook, and even when I wrote Crack the Code, which was book number 2 in 2016, I listed out all the ingredients that were in my house, and I had 80 that were different spices. And I'm not talking about like ingredients. I'm just talking about spices. I had 80. And when I showed the list to my mom, she was like, oh, you're missing a few. So you're not alone in thinking there are a lot of them. And like with anything, this is a cuisine that enjoys layering. And in Masaleydaar, you're going to find blends that have 2 and 3 ingredients, and then blends that have 8 or 10. There was one blend I kept out from the book that had 30, just because I know that 30 is a bit too much. I made it because I had all the ingredients, but I don't think you're going to. So, you have to experiment with it and not be afraid, because after all, you're in control. You carry the knives, you know when to shut the door on the spice cabinet that's yelling at you. So don't be afraid about it. Just go for it. It's fun. It can be very exciting.
may I make a comment? I wanted to make bale puri. I know it's not the most, extensive dish. And I was going to do it right from the start. And I started picking all the different ingredients. And a friend who was with me who's Indian said, "You're never going to use all these things again. Buy the kit. The kit is not a bad thing. It will have everything you need, and you don't waste your money or let all those spices go stale."
Here's what I will tell you. This is the devil's advocate answer to this. That's
Okay.
when you have a party. And you invite everybody you know, use all the ingredients at once, and make a big pot of bale puri. Believe me, I've done a couple of bale puri parties where I've had all the ingredients laid out, just made the sauces, and let everybody mix their own, and it was a blast. And I had nothing left over at the end of it. So
Yeah.
one idea for that. Oh, cool.
So, okay, so this was very educational. I do Indian tours and extensive cooking classes, and your presentation helped.
Thank you.
And if you're in the Chicago area, why don't you introduce yourself to us sometime?
Yes, I will do that.
And do you ever come to Chicago, by the way?
I do occasionally, not very often, but
Okay.
I mean, I love Chicago. Urbana-Champaign was like my first home in the city.
That's right.
So, it was, I think the last time I was there was probably in 2017, and then all kinds of things happened, and then COVID, and so I haven't traveled out that way. So, but
I think we're finished in this sense, but Scott wanted to give future programs
And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. And also, thank you, folks. I thought your questions were all wonderful tonight. Very, very, and thank you for your insightful responses. I've learned so much tonight. And again, I'm so hungry right now. So
I'm so sorry. I should have asked you to eat before you came.
no, why don't we have food samples? Oh, because we're Zoom. Okay, I forgot. It seems
well, we'll have to do it a different way until somebody just figures out how to teleport food across Zoom. I think we're stuck with this.
Oh, and also for ordering your book,
yes.
there were some things. Well, you can go to Nandita's website. What's your website again? It's Curry what?
It's Curry Cravings Kitchen. The chat box has all the links actually in there. So the Curry Cravings Kitchen is my is the website. You can go look there for recipes. Sometimes I'll just have a blog post about something that's related to what's going on at home. There are ways to order the book and other books. If you are on Instagram, I'd love a follow. I am at Curry Cravings pretty much anywhere you will see it. Curry Cravings, all one word. So Instagram, I don't do a lot of Twitter, so I wouldn't recommend that. I also have a small ceramics account for me, so that link is in the chat box as well. You can get the book on Kindle or Google Play or iBooks if you're looking for a digital copy. And then my website has a link to purchase the print book from me under inventory. So hopefully that should have all the stuff.
And I figured out a way to solve my hunger pangs. I've got to start cooking from your book.
Yeah, I would recommend cooking from the book, but grab a bite of like some fresh fruit and then go for it. You won't be.
Okay. Well, I hope our paths cross very soon again, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Yes, thank you so much. I miss seeing you.
Take care, my friend.
Take care, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.